Fender amplifiers. When you think of a Fender amp, I think most people have a certain sound in their head, and it's not necessarily the amp that's sitting to my right, your left right now. This is a 1959 Fender Bassman. It's the 5F6A schematic, which was only produced from 1958 to 1960. And this is a real one. This isn't a reissue. It's actually all original, other than it's actually been retweeted. But original transformers, it's been, changed to the 3-prong plug so you don't die. Everything else is original. And you're actually gonna hear it in a bit, or you're hearing it now. We're going into a brown box just to help it get down to that 110 volts like it's meant to run at, which I think makes it sound amazing. But it's a fantastic sound. So way back, back in time to when I was a young guitar player, I have some personal, just sort of maybe bias towards this amp and affection. The first real great amplifier I ever had was the LTD reissue of the 59 Bassman. This was in like the early 2000s. And I actually used that amp for a long time, all the way up until moving to Nashville. I was using that amp and gigging with it and touring with it some. And it met its demise when I was out and we were playing a show in Nebraska. And we were heading to Denver to play at a club called the Grizzly Rose with a band. Court Carpenter was the name of the country artist I was playing for. My son was actually about to be born, and I got a phone call that my wife needed me to fly home because he was gonna come early. So I actually left Kearney, Nebraska, flying out of the tiniest airport ever, to make it home in time so they can induce labor for my wife because she had some preeclampsia stuff going on. I made it, but I left my Bassman behind in the road case in the trailer. And on the way to Denver, the band actually, there was a sort of a freak blizzard and snow. They slid off the road into a field. And my poor little Bassman in the back in its little road case just was flopping around. So when they got back to Nashville and I opened the road case, all the bolts and junk fell out. And I thought it was never quite the same. So even that reissue that Fender makes, I think is phenomenal sounding. And like I said, I used it forever. I think there's actually a clip in here somewhere of me playing that amp at the basement in Nashville. So we'll stick that in. But there's something magical about the actual vintage amps. There's something, I've had a chance to play a couple. My friend actually in Nashville has a 58, I believe. This one's a 59. And there's just nothing like it. Part of that, I think, is the 410-inch speakers and the solid pine cab. Like there's a resonance to it when you play it that's not there in some of the blackface Fender stuff. And there's something about the swirl of 410-inch speakers. This is probably the only amp that I don't miss reverb in. And whether it's clean, if you're on lower on the sort of volume dial, the clean's sort of beautiful. If you're cranked up and you're pushing it like I was in the video, where you can actually hear some of that saturation, and it's not like heavy distortion, but it does this thing where it's sort of the harmonics kind of, they fold in on themselves, right? They're not really scooped. There's more mid there. The presence knob helps on this model, where you don't have that on some of the blackface stuff. But it's just an amazing sound. In fact, obviously, You know, you hear the legend all the time about how the first Marshall amps were based on these. In fact, the JTM 45s were basically a direct copy of the schematics. The differences are all sort of just the parts and the tubes that were available in the UK at the time. So you got some difference in sound just from that, from the KT66 tubes and the different parts on the chassis. But either way, you could probably say the fact that we have Marshall in a lot of the rock and roll amps that we have now, sort of thanks to this thing sitting here. And you can hear that, and you can hear that when you crank it up. And like I said, this might be my favorite Fender amp. It might be historically what I think is the most significant, and I just love the sound of it. I love the cleans. It's got a woodier sound, and I just like the kind of raunchy rock and roll thing that it does. I think it maybe is even a better distortion than any of the other Tweeds. You know, the 57 Custom is awesome, the Low Deluxe and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't do what the Bassman does with the 14-inch speakers. It's tricky sometimes to pin down who used these things where, like in the studio. So it's hard to point to recordings and say that was a Tweed Bassman, especially this version. The 5F 6A that was from 58 to 60. But there's so many guys that use them live. And part of me wonders if maybe it was more of a live thing than a studio thing, just because of the size of it, and it obviously gets loud. But you know, Clapton has used one. There's Jimi Hendrix stuff with Bassman stuff going on. There's SRV. Buddy Guy is a big one that jumps out in my brain. You got Joe Perry, you got Joe Walsh, you got Neil Young, Jeff Beck, Mike McCready is a big one. All sort of tied to Bassmans and Tweed Bassmans in particular. So if you've never played one of these things, do yourself a favor. I know that they're expensive now. They're not really in that realm of sort of the average amp buyer, but if you get your hands on one, a real one, an old one, if you know someone or you know where one is, do it. Crank it up, hear it, feel it, and I think it's especially if you're into the history of guitar amps and you're into the history of Fender, it's worth hearing. In my brain, it's sort of magical. It's something everybody needs to experience. If you can't get a hold of one of the vintage ones, the reissues are pretty darn good and pretty darn close. So yeah, just go play one of those. Whether you're using it for a pedal platform, whether you don't want any pedals and you just want to crank it up and use the volume knob on your guitar, in a lot of ways, in my brain, it's the perfect amp. So I love it. Go check it out. The Fender 59 Bassman. Like I said, this is an actual vintage 59 Bassman. So enjoy the demo sounds. Let us know what you think in the comments. Is this the greatest amp of all time? Arguably, I say yes. I want to know what you guys think. Some people hate them, some people love them. Let us know. Don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, click the bell. We'll see you guys next time.
you.